Most runs aren't lost in combat. They're lost when you build your deck wrong. If your deck feels weak halfway through a run, it's usually because you made the wrong decisions early. So here's how to build a winning deck step by step. The early game is the single hardest part of any Slay the Spire run. Act 1 is where a majority of people end up losing the run. I can tell you that from personal experience. Most of my losses come by the time I end up reaching the Act 1 boss, because once you get into Act 2, it starts to become a little bit easier. More options are open and your deck is really starting to form. The problem with the early game is that you need to solve immediate problems. What are the immediate problems? Hallway fights, early elites, and the Act 1 boss. The problem for you in any of these situations is that the starting deck sucks. You just don't have enough damage, you don't have enough block, you really don't have enough anything, because strikes and defends are pretty much the worst cards in the entire game. So in order to solve those problems, you need to put some front-loaded damage into your deck right away. The first 3 fights are easy pool fights on any Act 1 map. What that means is that your starting deck can defeat the 3 enemies without taking a ton of damage in 99.9% of situations. So your goal is to take advantage of those 3 easy pool fights by adding a bunch of front-loaded damage into your deck that's going to help you to solve the elites and to solve the Act 1 boss. In the very beginning of the game, front-loaded damage is infinitely more important than scaling damage, because scaling is good for the late game when the bosses have way more HP, when they hit way harder, and you need things to speed up a little bit. But typically that scaling damage is not going to solve the early elite fights for you, because they hit really hard right away, and the goal is to kill them right away. And the same goes for hard hallway fights. Scaling never, ever, ever works in that situation, because those guys will kill you before your scaling even gets off. If you die in Act 1, that late game scaling never mattered in the first place. That's why you don't necessarily want to pick up these great, wonderful cards that are good for like the mid to late game early on in Act 1, unless you have other ways to deal with the elites and the hard hallway fights. In Slay the Spire 2, what I found is that you also want to make sure that one of the cards that you take in the early fights is going to be an AoE card. In the original Slay the Spire, you could get away with not having any AoE cards, especially early on, because there were so many very strong cards that would just kind of burst enemies down really quickly. But in Slay the Spire 2, I have found that you really, really want AoE, especially because of some of the early game fights like the Phantasmal Gardeners, and any of the hard hallway fights is going to have just a set of enemies that you're going to need to kind of kill quickly with something like Astral Pulse that deals like 14 damage to every enemy, or Crush Under that deals 8 across the board and minuses some strength for that turn. I find that it's extremely important to have at least a little bit of an early game solve AoE card to get through the whole act, and it saves you a ton of HP when you do that. Now, there's certain situations where you don't necessarily need to take front-loaded damage from those first 3 fights. It's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. It kind of is, because it's very important to have the damage to beat down those elites and to make sure that you're getting through hard hallway fights without losing too much HP. Occasionally, you're offered a very, very strong block or damage mitigation card, and ultimately that's going to help you get through the run a little better. I'm going to go through some examples of both front-loaded damage cards and really good block cards that you could take in those first 3 fights, because certain block cards are going to provide more value in fights against certain elites or in fights against hard hallway enemies. And another situation where you could take a really strong block card is when you have a very strong front-loaded card already, a card that's going to be able to just kind of get through the entirety of Act 1 on its own. So here are some examples of good front-loaded damage cards that you could pick up early in Act 1 in Slay the Spire that's going to help you out a lot. Now, this is not every front-loaded card that's good. This is not even necessarily the best of the best cards that you could pick up. It's just some good examples of solid front-loaded damage. You got Ball Lightning that's going to just deal 7 damage, but also put a lightning above your head so that that lightning orb is going to deal even more damage. So in reality, Ball Lightning is dealing 10 damage every time you play it. Sunder is a big card that's going to deal 24 damage, and if you kill an enemy, you're going to gain some energy back. Pommel Strike is just good with good damage and good draw. Bludgeon is a big, huge beater card that Ironclad has. They've got a lot of those kind of cards. Most of these front-loaded cards are not going to be part of your end game plan, but they are important for this early game. That's why things like Defile and Reap are just very good, because Defile is 13 damage for 1 energy, and Reap is a retain card that deals 27 damage. Yeah, it costs 3 energy, but you're retaining it and you just use it when you know that you're going to win the fight against that enemy. We already talked a little bit about Astral Pulse. This is an incredible card to deal AoE. Collision Course is really good because it's 9 damage for a 0 cost card. Dash is also a really nice card because it gives you block on top of the damage. That is really good utility, just like Pommel Strike. Pommel Strike might not be the most damage for 1 energy, but it draws you an extra card, which is going to help you with your utility. Ricochet is a really, really nice card if you have anything that discards, which, by the way, Silence starts with a discard card with Survivor. Yeah, you might not always get Ricochet on the turn that you have Survivor, so you might not be able to play it for free every time, but it's dealing 3 damage to a random enemy 4 times, and it's only a 2 cost card, so Ricochet can be still played even if you don't discard it. And now we'll talk about a little bit of the damage mitigation that I was talking about. I want to preface this by saying, in order for you to take a damage mitigation or a block card, I think it has to be super strong in order to justify you not taking some front-loaded damage with those first 3 card rewards. Because block cards are a little too passive to defeat these early elites on their own. Those guys usually scale a lot, and you usually are not going to be able to outscale that damage with your block cards, especially early in Act 1. So I wouldn't just take any old average block card in the situation where you're presented with something with damage and a block card. Some of these cards, there is an easy justification for taking these over certain damage cards. Hologram is really cool because if you upgrade it, you can consistently put things back in your hand from your discard pile. Glacier is an incredibly strong card. When you see it, you usually want to click it because that frost is going to be great on top of the block that it provides. Colossus is amazing. Receiving 50% less damage from vulnerable enemies is a lot of damage. If you've never used it, you might not recognize how strong that really is. Taunt is a great Ironclad block card because that does sort of provide you with a little bit of damage because it's putting vulnerable on the enemy. Defy might be one of the best commons in the game, maybe even the best common in the game because Weak is so strong and it provides some block. Grave Warden is really, really strong as well because it's putting draw into your draw pile. Reflect may very well be the best Regent card, or at least the best Regent uncommon. It's not only blocking, but it is hitting the enemy back with whatever damage they're dealing to you that you were able to block yourself. Reflect, technically kind of a damage card, not just a block card. This one you can take pretty much any time, especially early on. That could be a win condition in and of itself. Bulwark is maybe the best Forge card in the game. It provides you with block and Forge. Again, sort of block, sort of damage because it is putting that Sovereign Blade into your hand. You won't be able to use the Sovereign Blade until the next turn, but that's a very powerful attack. And then Piercing Wail and Leg Sweep are 2 of the best defensive cards from Slay the Spire 1 and Slay the Spire 2. These are cards that are just super useful in any run, and they're just really hard to pass on regardless of how early into your run it is. Now, The only thing I have to say is you probably don't want to pick up multiples of these in those first couple fights where you're trying to build up damage. It's putting you at a greater risk of losing the entire run. Like I said, it's important to have that front-loaded damage from those first 3 card rewards, but if you want to put one really strong block card in there and only have 2 damage cards, that's okay. But once you start to get like 2 block cards in the first couple of picks, it starts to become too heavy on the block and damage mitigation side where you're unable to sort of defeat enemies unless the 1 damage card you picked up is dealing like a huge amount of damage and you know that you're going to be able to get through the axe with them. Step 2 of building a winning deck is identifying your win condition. Now that comes with a bit of a caveat. That's if you have one. So you want to kind of start thinking about this once you have your first couple front-loaded damage cards and you think that it's enough damage to get you through the rest of the first act. You want to start thinking about this like around the time that you get that first act treasure chest, because then you got yourself a relic. Maybe you've taken on an elite fight already. Maybe you haven't, and that's okay, and you're going to take one on next. But your goal is to figure out your win condition again, if you have one at this point. That could be a strong card. That could be a strong relic, a strong combo that you might have in the deck. It's something that you should be thinking about midway through Act 1. But most of the time, you probably don't have a win condition in your deck already, so you're probably going to have an easier time identifying it once you get to like Act 2 and you get your Act 1 boss reward, or you get your relic from one of the ancients. That's going to help you to be able to determine the direction that you want to go, and that's going to help you to determine what your win condition is. Either way, your deck needs a plan, and the earlier that you can start thinking about that plan, the better it is, because you may have gotten really lucky and faced an elite in Act 1 and gotten yourself a very good card that's going to help you take the deck in a certain direction. But identifying a win condition is where most players end up failing. If your deck doesn't know how it wins, then it won't. Some quick examples of win conditions can be like poison on the silent, multi-hit synergies from almost any character. You might have like sort of a focus build on defect, or maybe even a status build that you're working towards. Your necro deck might have a focus on doom or really building up Asti. Regent might have some sort of way that you're building up stars really quick so that you could play these big beaters like Comet. Every single character has a multitude of different ways that they can win between really good cards, really good relics, and whatever combos that you can pick up to piece together. So don't just try to box yourself into a specific archetype. Think about all the important things that you need in order to win. Where's your scaling coming from? Where's your block coming from? How do you actually win fights every time you go into one? Step 3 to building winning decks is stop taking random cards. You only want cards that are going to support your win con. Again, if you don't have a win con yet, well, then you're looking for a win condition. You don't want to bloat your deck with random crap that's already kind of duplicates of what you already got in there, right? You already have a couple really strong front-loaded cards, and then in Act 2, you find another really strong front-loaded card, but you don't really have any scaling. You don't really have a direction that you're going. Probably not a good idea to pick up that big beater card because you're already getting through fights with the front-loaded damage that you have. You should be in search of a specific win condition that's going to take your deck to the next level. Or if you already have a win condition, you don't want to put random cards into the deck that are going to dilute it. Just in general, you don't want to do that because it's going to be really hard to get to your most important cards. Another thing that you should definitely be thinking about once you get to around like Act 2 or like middle of Act 2 or even late early first act, if you already know sort of the direction that your deck is going, you want to remove unnecessary cards. Honestly, forget when it is. You probably want to remove strikes as soon as possible. So any events that you get where you can transform a card, usually you want to take advantage of that and transform a strike into something else. That's also going to help you to find a win condition potentially by transforming cards. Any events or shops that you get a chance to remove cards, you want to do that. You want to get rid of those strikes, because strikes are genuinely the worst cards in the game. Definitely when you're in this stage of the game, around Act 2, middle of Act 2, sort of that mid-game, you really want to start removing some strikes and some of your starter cards if you haven't done that already. A smaller focused deck is definitely better than a big confused one. That's not to say that you want to stop taking cards. That's not to say that you can't win with a big deck, because of course, you can do both of those things. You just don't want to take random bad cards that are not going to help you move in a good direction. Usually the bigger decks are the ones that have a ton of draw that can cycle through their deck quickly. It's not really about the size of your deck so much. It's more about the quickness and the speed that you can cycle through all the cards that you have to get to your most important ones over and over and over again. Most of the time, it's easier to do that with a smaller deck. And the way you do that is by not putting random garbage cards that are really, really gonna hurt you into your deck, unless you desperately need it at that very moment for like the next fight that's coming up, or for, you know, the next boss that you're going to be facing. But honestly, in that situation, you could also just use potions to deal with those same situations without bloating your deck. Step 4 to building a winning deck is transitioning to scaling. Now here in the mid to late game, you're no longer worried about front-loaded damage. What you need to do is make sure that your damage scales really, really well. You want to make sure that you have the right survivability. Those really good block cards that we talked about earlier, you want to make sure you have a couple of those in your deck now. And maybe most importantly, you want to make sure that your deck is starting to synergize and that you don't just have a random group of like quote unquote good cards, because all those good cards, if they're not working off of each other, they no longer are good in those situations. That's not to say that a pile of really, really good cards isn't going to work in Slay the Spire, but it is a lot harder to get it to work because you really want that deck to be synergistic and working well together. And you want to make sure that your damage keeps scaling upwards and that your block also keeps scaling upwards. You want to make sure that you can get to your good cards faster with maybe some draw cards. You also want to make sure that you have enough energy to play all of your good cards out. So in that situation, maybe you want to make sure that your energy is scaling. Maybe you want to make sure that your card draw is getting up there. The early game of Slay the Spire is about surviving, and the late game is all about overpowering enemies as best as you can. Most of the Act 2 bosses aren't just going to be able to just be beaten down with the same front-loaded cards that you had in Act 1. You're going to need some cards that scale their damage. You're going to need some ways to take advantage of their bigger health pools and their harder hitting attacks. Here's some really nice scaling cards for each character. And what you need to determine is, how are you going to scale your deck? What are the problems that your deck might have here in like the mid to late game? What are the ways that you win, and how can you create scaling around those? So for example, we got the defect, we have defrag. If you're using a lot of orb stuff, defrag is going to be good focus that's going to make each one of your orbs get stronger without you having to put in any extra effort. Meteor strike, that is a way to scale not just damage, but your energy generation. If you can figure out a way to consistently get off a 5 power, 24 damage, 3 plasma card. Hellraiser is going to be a way for you to deal damage for free. Anytime you draw a strike card, it's going to automatically play that. That is great scaling damage in the end game. Demon form is going to give you strength every single turn. It's a big expensive card, but again, if you have enough energy, you're going to be able to play it. Similar to End of Days. End of Days costs 3 energy, apply 29 doom to all enemies, and then kills enemies with at least as much doom as HP. End of days genuinely ends the days of your enemies. If you have enough doom scaling in your deck, end of days is that finishing touch. Hang is going to deal 10 damage, then double the damage all hang cards deal to this enemy. That is really, really good, especially in like one-on-one boss fights. For example, Doormaker, or even technically the Queen. This is a great way to scale against a single target. Genesis is a really good way to scale up your star generation because you're just always gaining stars at the start of your turn. Bombardment is constant damage that's getting done over and over and over again to the enemies as long as you play it out once. Knife Trap is a way to make all your shivs go absolutely ballistic. Burst is a way to double the amount of skills that you're playing, especially your important skills. You play Burst before your acrobatics in some sort of slide deck, you're going absolutely ballistic with it. Now again, these are not the only scaling cards from each character. These were just cool examples of scaling cards that I really liked. They're all rares, as you can see. I didn't put any uncommons or even commons in there, but there are plenty of scaling cards in the uncommon pool for each of the characters. There's plenty of other rares that scale. Make sure you go out there and experiment a little. Learn what are really good scaling cards, because there's a lot of really fun ways to win in Slay the Spire too. And the fifth step in building a winning deck is that you want to refine and cut the garbage. Once you get yourself to like very late Act 2, or really just Act 3 is where most of the time you're really refining your deck and you're just getting rid of all the junk. The early game is where you survive, the mid game is where you build your engine, and the late game is where you're going to optimize your deck. Your deck doesn't get stronger by adding more cards. It gets stronger by removing the wrong ones. Now, that's not to say you can never take any card rewards in Act 3. Of course you can. Most of the time, though, you're passing on card rewards. You want to skip a majority of them because usually by now you have a really nice direction that you want your deck to go down. Sometimes that isn't the case. It's rare, but it does happen, and sometimes you got to switch things up. So in those situations, of course, you got to pivot a little bit, but a majority of the time in Act 3, you want to remove the rest of your starter cards if you can. You want to get rid of those last strikes and defends. Again, if you can. You can't always remove every single defend you have. You can't usually always remove every single strike. A lot of the times you can at least remove another 1, 2, maybe 3 in that Act 3. And that's going to make a world of difference in terms of making your deck more consistent. You're going to want to fill in any deck holes that you might have. If you see that you're facing a specific boss and you don't really have an answer for them, well, you want to fill your deck out with an answer for that boss, or you want to pick up a potion that can be an answer to that boss. I think that's a big key and part of deck making that people kind of forget is potions. You know, sometimes you don't want to fill your deck with junk. So instead you can use a potion that's going to kind of single-handedly take down the boss that you're looking at, or at least like really, really help out a lot. That's going to help keep your deck consistent by not filling it with more bloat. And it's going to be a lot easier and a lot cheaper for you to get those potions at, say, a shop, rather than try and get more cards that maybe aren't going to help you complete your goal. But the true goal of Act 3 is to make your deck completely consistent and to maybe add a little extra power through maybe some relics that you pick up from elites or you can grab from a shop. But the most important thing is deck consistency. And deck consistency, you get there by removing cards, or maybe you add some draw cards so that you can cycle through the deck faster. Because like I said earlier, it's not about the size of the deck that you're building. It is all about how fast you can cycle through it and how fast you can get to the most important cards that are going to be the keys to winning the fights against your Act 3 bosses in order to actually finish and win the whole run. Fix your early game, find a win condition, stop taking random cards, and refine your deck, and your runs will instantly improve. If you enjoyed this video, listen to Wongo, subscribe to the channel. We're super close to 4,000 subs, and we're on the road to 5,000. You'll help out a lot by subscribing. Give the video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. Check out some of my other guides and some of my runs on the channel. Appreciate you big time. Have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.